My mother's neglect led me to getting violently kidnapped at 6 years old. You won't believe how I was saved. My mum was a horrible substance addict who heavily neglected me. One night when I was 6, my mother and I were on a car ride and I was half asleep in the back seat. My mum drove up to some sketchy house and left me in the car for what felt like forever. Suddenly, the car door swung open and someone violently grabbed me by my arm and yanked me out of the car. I started screaming and crying until the man that grabbed me looked me in my eyes and said, "Nothing." He was stone-faced. He had a scruffy beard and looked like a madman. I was scared, so I listened. He held me tight by my arm, shut the car door and walked with me down the street. I looked back at the house my mom was in, hoping that my mom would come out at the last second and save me. I looked at the house as long as I could as the man dragged me further and further away. As we walked down the street, I wanted to cry, but I was in shock and in fear. I didn't know what to do. If I sniffled or cried, the man would tighten his grip and yell at me. We walked for a little while and ended up in the projects. The projects were a bunch of buildings crammed together in a crappy neighborhood. We walked into one of the buildings and walked up a flight of stairs. My legs and feet hurt like hell, but I was too scared to stop moving or complain. We walked up another flight of stairs when I saw some random guy smoking grass in the stairway. Then without warning, the guy that kidnapped me fell to the ground. It happened so fast. I didn't know how the kidnapper fell to the ground so fast, but the next thing I remember is the grass guy was wailing on the kidnapper mercilessly. The kidnapper was out cold. Grass guy picked up the kidnapper by the back of his jacket and kneaded him down the stairs. I still have no idea how Grass guy knew to help me, but I'm glad he did. Maybe he could see tears in my eyes, maybe he just picked up on something and had a bad vibe, but he acted instantly. The first second he could, he attacked my would-be kidnapper. Afterwards, Grass Guy starts pacing back and forth, swearing at himself, gritting his teeth and clenching his fists. I thought he was mad at me, so I started to cry. He looked at me and said, okay, shut up. He had an attitude, so I listened to him out of fear. I wasn't as scared of the grass guy as much as the bearded guy, but I was still in fear of him. He started to ask me questions with an attitude like, why are you out this late? Where are your parents? Why would you talk to strangers? I was in so much shock and confusion I couldn't answer the man's questions correctly. He asked if I knew my way home and I told him I didn't. I told him a broken story about what happened and somehow with the information I gave him, he knew where my mom's car was. The only thing I remember about the road is passing a house with Christmas lights on it despite Christmas already being over. I think he knew the area well enough and figured out where I needed to go from that information, but I honestly don't even remember telling him about the Christmas lights. Anyways, he told me he would take me back if I promised over and over that I wouldn't tell the police that I saw him or anyone that looked like him and made me promise that I wouldn't even tell the police anything. He had an attitude. I didn't care what he asked me, I just wanted to go back to my mom, so I agreed. I followed him down the stairs. The bearded guy was still laying on the ground pouring red at the bottom of the stairs that grass guy threw him down. He wasn't moving at all. For all I know, he was gone, and I hoped now that he was. Grass Guy stepped over the beard guy, and I followed. We walked outside, and Grass Guy looked around panicky. I remember him telling me the police don't like me. We walked out of the projects, and my feet still hurt. Grass Guy was walking fast in a panic, and I had to basically jog to keep up with him. I started crying, and he asked me what was wrong. I told him my feet hurt, and I remember him sucking his teeth and picking me up with an attitude. He awkwardly cradled me in both arms. Then he walked down the road for a moment. Then I remember him swearing and running behind a house or a building. A cop car was driving down the road, and he put me down and told me to run to the police car. I tried to run, but my legs could barely move, and I was scared. The cop car kept driving and rode away without seeing me before I could even get remotely close to it. He kept swearing to himself as he picked me up again and ran down the street. He took me behind a lot of houses and hid from every cop car that drove by. I assume now that the police were looking for me. He carried me in both arms, running fast down the road when I saw my mom in her car in the distance. She was surrounded by police. Grass Guy put me down and told me to run to the police. I got so excited the pain in my legs disappeared. He put me down and ran away, so I ran towards the police and my mom picked me up and hugged me tight. The police started to ask me and my mum questions. I don't remember too much about their questions, but I remember my mum telling the police some convoluted story that just didn't make any sense. She basically told me not to say anything, and I didn't say much, but cried a whole bunch. We went home. Days later, my dad picked me up and knew something was wrong. I told him everything. I never lived with my mum again. At the age of 19, life wasn't all that great. Me and my parents' relationship was growing further apart every day. Although the neighborhood I lived in was far from safe, anytime I could leave the house and get away from them, I would. I was at a gas station at night. As I walked out, I was grabbed, hit in the head, and thrown in the back of a car trunk. I didn't even have time to scream. The man who grabbed me and kidnapped me did it flawlessly. I woke up inside a basement with two men beside me. The basement was pretty normal looking. You would have no idea a person would be held captive in there. There was a nice looking kitchen, a dining room, even a master bedroom. I spent the next 3 days there fighting for my life. Day 1 was the most stressful, but far from the worst. They wanted me to call my parents for ransom money. I knew my parents wouldn't pay because we had a terrible relationship. They always said how they never cared about me, how much they regret ever giving birth to me, and how their lives were much better when I wasn't a part of it. With no hope, I still called. I called them once, no answer. He let me call them again, still no answer. After the second time they didn't answer, he was getting ready to attack me. He ordered me to call them one more time, and when I did, they still didn't answer. He started attacking me. They had a large set of yard clippers they brought over to me and started to threaten me. I begged for them to just wait a little longer and they might call back, but he refused. He took the clippers and cut my ring finger off. It was the most pain I had ever endured, but I will save you from the graphic imagery. Day 2 was horrible. I remember them coming downstairs with pliers and thinking, what are they gonna do? The one guy asked me to open up my mouth. He began pulling my teeth. My hands and feet were bound, so I couldn't fight back. I was shaking and thrashing beyond belief. The pain was insane. The rest of the day was a blur. I remember sitting alone in the basement praying they would let me go, but they never did. I was fed just enough dog food every night to be able to survive. Other than that, I was staring at the walls while my mind was racing. Day 3 was when they tried to unalive me. With my parents not responding and no hope to make money for me, they tried to remove me. I got shot twice, and I blacked out after that. When I woke up, I was alone and the house was silent. I remember thinking I was dead but didn't know. I assumed hours had passed, but I had no clue. I heard a loud noise upstairs but thought it was them doing something. The basement door flew open and it was the police. They carried me out of the basement. I remember being loaded into the ambulance, but everything after that was a blur. I woke up in the hospital. From what I was told, my parents were the ones who informed the police. Although it was normal for me to be gone for a couple of days, they said they had a feeling in their gut that there was something truly wrong. I was released 12 days later after being treated for everything. Me and my parents have a great relationship now. We put aside all of our arguments as shortcomings because I could never be more grateful for them for saving me. I have PTSD from the situation and I go to therapy twice a week. I'm scared to go into stores now. I hate living in fear, but I can't help it. A woman kidnapped my child and accused my husband of being the kidnapper. One day, my husband and I were at the supermarket and our baby was being especially fussy, so he took her for a quick drive, the motion of which usually calms her down. It only took about 10 minutes to settle her and I was still in the store, so he pulled back into the parking lot to wait for me. It was an unseasonably nice day, so he took her in a car seat to sit on one of the benches outside of the store. He took a business call and had just sat them down, absent-mindedly rocking the carrier when a woman approached them. It's not uncommon for people to ask to play with our baby. She's got big rosy cheeks, soft wisps of gold hair, and the most adorable jerky toothless grin, especially when she's deep into a good nap. But her nap schedule is paramount, so my husband was preparing to tell the woman she actually couldn't play with our baby right then. She walked over right in their direction, brimming with nonchalant confidence, and before he could even finish his sentence explaining she was napping and not to be touched, she picked up the carrier and started walking off. He was in shock for a minute. Not fully believing someone would be ballsy enough to do something so sinister in plain daylight, he said, "Excuse me, put her down," as his panic mounted. She remained calm this entire time, but when he called after her, she started walking away more briskly than when she'd approached. He ran full speed ahead and tried to grapple the carrier out of her hands, finally resulting in restraining her arms. This woman yells, "Help! He's trying to take my baby! Call 911!" while kicking him in the shin and pulling a pink bottle of pepper spray out of her handbag. Of course, no one in the parking lot was clocking the early interaction and assumed he really was a kidnapper. A lone man in a Deadpool t-shirt versus a tiny, well-dressed woman. A man knocked my husband to the ground and held him down. He could hear bystanders encouraging the woman to file a police report, but she was doing a very convincing job of acting shaken up and insisting she just wanted to get home. To make matters worse for my husband, she was driving a minivan. He was in a raw state of panic, realizing the entire parking lot had banded together to inadvertently facilitate the kidnapping of our daughter. He was begging and pleading with them, but no one was listening. They just kept screaming at him that the jig was up and he needed to lie still and wait for police and stop terrorizing a young mother. My husband finally had the novel idea to show them family pictures on his phone. But, too panicked to think clearly, this manifested as him shouting, "I have pictures of the baby on my phone." Which, of course, everyone interpreted as him having either stalking photos or worse, explicit images of the baby. It was at this point that a man kicked my husband as hard as he could in the ribs. It was also at this point I had exited the store and thought he was being robbed by these people. I was yelling for security, but I was panicking so much that my chest constricted and I could barely get any sound out. It was only then that I realized he did not have our baby with him. When I saw she was being held by a woman, I was relieved. I thought maybe the woman had intervened to move my daughter out of harm's way while my husband was being robbed and was walking away to get help. I couldn't find a security guard outside the store, so I ran up to the people holding my husband down, waving my wallet, pleading to take everything you want, just let up and leave us alone. And one of the men holding him down said, "Lady, we need to wait for the police to deal with this." And I was so confused. Why would the muggers have called the police? I just kept stammering, "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" and made out someone saying he tried to abduct that woman's kid. I did not understand and was sure I'd misheard him. My husband would never hurt a child, and we have 4 kids. If he was going to commit a crime, bringing home another kid would be at the bottom of his list. I kept trying to understand what the man was saying, and suddenly it all clicked. I looked around for the woman who had the baby carrier, and she was halfway across the parking lot. I went into total ballistic tiger cub mode, literally leapt out of my heels, and sprinted across the parking lot. I'm not a UFC fighter. I've never even taken a self-defense class, so all I could think to do was grab the woman by her hair and squeeze her throat with my other hand. Amazingly, none of the other bystanders had yet to connect that my husband was telling the truth and this woman was absconding with my baby. I yanked on her hair as hard as I could, and that was enough to make her drop the carrier. I was so scared and surprised that I actually just threw myself on top of the carrier, covering the entire thing like a blanket, and stayed that way without saying or doing anything else. The woman left. Not one person tried to stop her, even though she was clearly leaving without the child she claimed was hers, which would be pretty incriminating if I'd watched this scene unfold. Within the next couple of minutes, police had arrived. After all of that, there were still several bystanders who explained it as my husband trying to kidnap the baby. The police, to my horror, assumed that she must not have had bad intentions. The first questions they asked me after getting her description weren't investigative. They were questions thinly veiled, trying to convince me not to pursue charges, still placing blame on my husband. They spent more time verifying that the baby was actually mine than they concerned themselves with the fact that the baby was not actually hers. My husband had called his brother at that point, who works in an office with a lot of lawyers, and connected with one who gave us the priceless advice to get every officer's name and badge number, to request copies of the store security tapes right away, and to escalate our complaint higher up the chain if these officers weren't taking us seriously. Finally, we had reason enough to believe we were being taken seriously, and we went home. Noth just shook and cried until we had to get our other kids from school. My husband was seething with rage and grappling with the feeling of helplessness from how little he was able to do. And had 2 cracked ribs from when the man kicked him. Amazingly and frustratingly, there were still people who stuck around to talk to police who were giving my husband dirty looks, and one man who even implored the police to involve CPS to verify it really was our baby. Parking lot kidnapper, you better hope we don't meet again. I was raised by the men who kidnapped me. The people I live with aren't my parents. They aren't even related to my parents, as far as I can tell. They're just people, cold, ruthless, angry people who just wanted to have a daughter of their own and didn't care whose lives they destroyed to get one. I've always known there was something strange about them. Martha, Mom, looks nothing like me, and she thinks nothing like me. She's always blithering about her precious china plates or sorting her collections of pristine dresses and shoes that no one's allowed to wear. Tyler, Dad, is an auto mechanic who smells like gasoline all the time, always mumbling and looking away as though he's ashamed to be alive. I don't know what I'm supposed to do or who I'm supposed to be when I grow up, but I've lived with them long enough to know what I don't want. They treat me like a possession. I speak what I'm spoken to. I wear what I'm told to wear, go where I'm told to go, and even at 15, I'm never, ever allowed to go out alone. And you know what really makes me sick? The fact that I'd looked past all of their manipulative, controlling habits for my whole life. It didn't matter that I wasn't allowed to go play with friends. Dad wanted to keep me safe, and he knew best. It didn't matter that Mom forced me to spend countless hours sitting on the floor to sew lace onto her clothes. It was all I've ever known, and I trusted them, but not anymore. I found out when I stumbled across a personal ad in the local paper. I don't read the news, but I'd picked up a big stack for a school paper mash project, and there it was on top. Missing 15-year-old girl. My birthday, brown hair, green eyes. We haven't given up. We will never forget. Last seen 12 years ago. Pink bow in her hair. Below that, 2 pictures. One of them is a baby girl, about 3 years old. Another one that looked like a computer-generated prediction of what she would look like now. The hair was all wrong, but other than that, it felt like looking into a mirror. My birthday, my description, my picture. I couldn't breathe. I'd never gotten along with the people I'd lived with, but I'd tolerated them this long because I thought underneath all their self-absorption, they were my family. I was supposed to love them. Imagining them snatching me out of a park, imagining the countless nights my real parents must have searched and prayed and cried, it made my blood boil. I started flipping through the stack of papers. There the ad was again, another month back, and another month before that. Always the same words, we will never forget. Are you making a mess in there? It was Martha. Her beady little eyes tracking me from the living room, judging every move I made. I did my best to keep my trembling hands from betraying what I found as I neatly stacked the newspapers once more. Do you have any baby pictures I could look at? I asked innocently. Martha's face crinkled with distaste. Of course, but I don't want you looking. You never put anything away properly. I mean when I was really small, like 2 years old. I scrutinized her face for any sign of discomfort, but it was too difficult to read when she was always scowling like that. I shouldn't think so, she huffed, turning back to her magazine. There was that flood when you were, but you'd be too young to remember. It was all I needed to know. I went back to my room and dialed the phone number in the ad. I was actually in tears when the voice crackled through the other line. Mom, are you there? We didn't call the police. We figured that anyone who could live their entire lives as a lie were capable of anything. Instead, we were just going to do it as quietly as possible. I packed my favorite clothes in a backpack and hid it under my bed. I let Tyler tuck me in, somehow resisting the urge to spit in his face when he leaned in to kiss me goodnight. I let Martha watch me from the crack in the door, pale orbs glowing where they reflected the moonlight. I pretended to be asleep, my whole body flushed and throbbing in anticipation. Finally, the coast was clear. I grabbed my backpack and snuck out in my pajamas, not wanting to spend a second longer in that house than I had to. There was a car waiting for me at the end of the block. For the first time I could remember, I was going back to my real home. A woman got out of the passenger side and waved to me. Not just any woman, it was my mom. I knew it before I even saw her. I was running without realizing it, and she was running too. We didn't slow down until we collided, hugging and crying, utterly abandoned by words. She smelled like warm cinnamon. Then a man got out of the driver's side, but before I could approach him, the deck lights behind me turned on. Tyler, she's running away. I told you something was wrong. I flew into the car and didn't look back. My parents, my real parents, were tearing up the road. I was giggling like a maniac the whole way. We never stopped believing, my father was saying from the front. That's not to say it didn't get hard sometimes, but the other children are going to be so happy too. Mom squealed with adrenaline. I have brothers and sisters? I couldn't stop smiling. 2 complete strangers, and already they seemed closer to me than my old family ever was. Something like that. My parents exchange a knowing look, and they can't wait to meet you. Barred windows, a padlock on the front door, concrete floors. I don't know what I was expecting home to be, but this wasn't it. A dozen frightened faces lifted to greet us when the door ran. A little girl screeched, about 12 years old. She jumped up as soon as she heard us, but I was so bewildered that I didn't make the slightest move. I was shoved hard from behind and fell to my knees. The door slammed shut behind me. My parents were on the outside, and I could hear the padlock snap back into place. "I'm sorry," the little girl said. "I'm so sorry." "Mom? Dad?" It wasn't that I refused to believe what was going on. I was incapable of believing. I had built this fantasy up in my head so long that for the moment at least, it was still stronger than whatever reality tried to break through. We will never forget. It was my mother, but the voice was wrong. I couldn't see her on the other side of the door, but I knew that sound could only come through a snarl. "And neither will you." "Forget what? Mom? Dad? What's going on?" I felt a small hand in mine, and I jumped. Everything was moving so fast. I let the girl guide me back to the fireside where all the others were sitting. The walls were decorated with newspaper clippings, personal ads, hundreds of them, all for missing children, all promising that they never forget. "That's mine over there." The little girl pointed at her picture in one of the ads. "Stop talking to her. You'll be punished for it," an older girl said. I scanned the other children, all teenagers I think, all girls. Some of them looked like people I might bump into on the street, but others were strangers. Their skin was drawn tight and riddled with bruises and sores. Their eyes were hollow, and I got the impression that they didn't even see me when they were pointed in my direction. "I don't care," the younger girl insisted. She steered me up against the wall and sat cross-legged in front of me. I could barely see her face through the matted hair. "They hate girls. That's why we're here." "That's not the reason," the older girl sighed. "It's because they're crazy. There doesn't need to be any other reason." "They lost their own daughter," the younger continued. "She was a hooker or something, and she got killed. I don't know the details, but I guess they started collecting girls after that. Every once in a while, a foreign man, he's from Russia," one of the others interjected. "Foreign man comes and chooses some of us. Then they go with him." "What happens to the one who aren't chosen?" I asked. But looking around, I already knew the answer. "Don't worry about it. They'll pick you," the older girl said. I don't know why she thought that. I could barely even see her face in the gloom. "Here." The little girl handed me a notepad and a pen. "You can have this if you want." "What am I supposed to write?" She shrugged. "Anything you want. At least then there will be something left when you're gone." The first thing I wrote was, "I love you, Mom. I love you, Dad." The second thing I wrote, "You're reading now."